You wake in a bed that is not your own. The year is 1860. The place is England. And though the streets outside already murmur faintly with the passing of carts and the occasional clatter of a horse's hooves, your first impression is of stillness. The bed is heavy, carved from dark wood, and the mattress beneath you is stuffed not with springs, but with horsehair and wool. It is firmer than you are used to. The pillow beneath your cheek is likewise different, lumpy and uneven, filled with feathers that shift with your weight. The sheets are linen, cool against the skin, and the quilt above you is thick, hand-stitched, a patchwork of faded florals and dark stripes. It has weight to it, a heaviness that seems to hold you in place. The air of the room strikes you next. It is not the even, centrally heated air of the 21st century. Instead, it carries a damp chill, the kind that clings to the lungs. You can feel, without needing to rise, that there is a fireplace nearby, though its embers are long extinguished from the night before. The faint smell of coal ash lingers, mixing with the sharper temps of candle wax. There is no electric hum, no distant thrum of traffic. Instead, there is the faint creak of wooden beams in the ceiling, and the muffled sound of a servant's footfall somewhere beyond the door. You are lying in a Victorian bedroom, and the year is precise, 1860. The room itself is modest, though it reflects its owner's class. The walls are papered with floral patterns, a little faded, the colors muted from years of coal smoke and gaslight. Against one wall stands a washstand, on which rests a porcelain basin and a matching pitcher filled with cold water drawn the night before. Next to it lies a bar of soap, rough and yellowish, smelling faintly of lye and tallow. A small hand towel hangs from a hook at the foot of the bed. A chest sits with brass fittings. On its surface, a folded dressing gown has been placed, ready for you to slip into before braving the chill of the room. There is no radiator, no convenient thermostat. Warmth will depend on layers, on heavy fabrics, on the fire that will later be coaxed back to life by a maid. When you shift in bed, the sensation of clothing reminds you of another peculiarity. You did not sleep in nothing, nor in modern nightclothes. Instead, you find yourself in a long, white cotton nightdress, loose-fitting, but high-necked, its hem brushing against your ankles, its sleeves long. It is both protective and cumbersome. Beneath it, depending on your station, you may or may not still wear a layer of undergarments, for many women of the time did not fully disrobe at night. Clothing was a shield against the cold, and modesty extended even into sleep. Now comes the matter of rising. In Victorian England, the day began earlier than in much of the modern world. Servants stirred before dawn to lay fires, fetch coal, and begin boiling water. For the mistress of a middle-class household, rising around 7 was common, though the precise hour depended on wealth, habits, and the demands of the day. The sound of a knock at the door may reach you, a gentle tap from the maid bringing up hot water in a jug, if your household could afford such service. Otherwise, you would have to content yourself with the cold water that has sat in the pitcher overnight, perhaps with a skin of ice on particularly harsh mornings. Imagine dipping your hands into it, splashing it on your face to banish sleep. The shock would be immediate. As you sit up, you would see the small details of the room that mark its era. A chamber pot rests discreetly beneath the bed, porcelain or earthenware. its use necessary in the absence of indoor plumbing. To visit the privy outside in the cold morning would be an unpleasant ordeal, so this vessel provided a practical, if inelegant, solution. Next to it might lie a pair of slippers, embroidered, if you were of means, or simply plain, sturdy leather if not. Beside the bed, on the nightstand, stands a candle in a brass holder, its wax melted into irregular ridges from the night's burning. Matches rest in a small box nearby, though these are not the safety matches of the 20th century. Instead, they are strychoniware matches, sulphurous and acrid in their scent. Gaslight was beginning to spread into wealthier homes in cities, but in 1860 many households still relied on candles and oil lamps. Electricity was decades away from being commonplace. The view from your window is also telling. If you were in London, perhaps you would see narrow streets lined with soot-stained buildings, their rooftops tangled with chimney pots. A milkman might trundle past with clinking bottles, or a sweeps boy might already be at work. If you were in a country house, the view would be softer rolling fields, a kitchen garden, or a gravel path leading to stables. Either way, the glass of the window itself would be imperfect, wavy, and prone to condensation. Curtains would be drawn aside by now, heavy fabric edged with fringe. Rising from bed in 1860 was not a casual matter. The room was cold, your body unaccustomed to such abrupt change in temperature, and so the dressing gown at the foot of the bed was not a luxury but a necessity. Slipping it on, you would feel its weight and warmth, the roughness of wool or the smoother texture of cotton, depending on your household's wealth. The first order of the day was washing. At the washstand, you would pour water from the pitcher into the basin, the splash echoing in the stillness. The soap, as mentioned, was harsh. It cleaned effectively but left the skin dry. Towels were often rough-woven. There was no mint-flavored toothpaste, no plastic toothbrush. Instead, a simple brush with bristles often made from animal hair was used, along with powders of chalk or charcoal. The taste was not pleasant. For some, salt served as a substitute. Dental hygiene was a concern, though one poorly understood. By modern standards, as you wash, you might reflect on the many layers of ritual surrounding even these small acts. In the modern day, they are swift, faultless. In 1860, they demanded effort, fetching, carrying, pouring, wiping, all with tools that were imperfect and substances that were crude. And yet, these were ordinary routines, unnoticed by those who lived them, forming the quiet fabric of daily existence. You dress slowly, still in the privacy of your room. This, too, is a layered process, quite literally. The Victorian woman did not simply pull on a single garment. She built her attire piece by piece, beginning with undergarments, then stays or corsets, followed by petticoats, bodices, skirts, and outer layers. But this is a subject for another story. For now, you simply sense the looming task, the awareness. That dressing was a ritual that consumed both time and energy. The clock on the mantel, ticking faintly, reminds you of the hour. Breakfast waits below, though what shape it will take depends on class and region. For now, though you are still here, in this room, at the cusp of the day, the first breath of morning air has been taken, the first splash of water endured, the first candle stub extinguished. You are awake in 1860, in a Victorian woman's body, standing at the threshold of her daily life. And so, as you pull your dressing gown tighter against the chill, you might wonder, what exactly will the rest of this day demand of you? The moment of rising has passed. You are no longer held by the cocoon of quilts, nor pressed by the firmness of the horsehair mattress. The fire has yet to be stirred back to life, and so the cold lingers, a quiet reminder of how much labor the day will require before comfort can return. You stand in the center of the Victorian bedroom, a nightdress around you, your hair slightly mussed from sleep. The next duty is dressing. In 1860, clothing was not only a matter of personal comfort, but also of social meaning. Every stitch and layer carried a message about who you were, what class you belonged to, and what respectability you could claim in the eyes of neighbors, visitors, and strangers in the street. To dress was to armor yourself against the world, but it was also to bind yourself into a system of manners, propriety, and daily constraint. Let us begin from the innermost layer outward. At the start, there are the chemise and drawers. The chemise is a long, loose undergarment of cotton or linen, designed to protect the more expensive outer layers from sweat and oils of the body. It is plain, without adornment, though sometimes a bit of lace or embroidery appears at the neckline. Beneath the chemise, drawers are worn long, loose trousers gathered at the knee. These were a relatively new addition to women's wardrobes. In the mid-19th century, often divided for convenience. In an era when laundering outer clothing was costly and laborious, these underlayers bore the burden of cleanliness. Over the chemise comes the corset, a garment surrounded by myth and misunderstanding. In 1860, corsets were made of cotton or linen, stiffened with whalebone or steel. They were not necessarily the instruments of extreme discomfort imagined by later caricatures, but neither were they forgiving. Their purpose was not only to shape the waist, but also to provide support for the bust and a structured foundation for the skirts and bodices above. For a woman of this period, the corset was an expected daily necessity, worn from girlhood onward. You might imagine the sensation of tightening the laces. At first, the corset hugs the rib cage, pressing lightly, then more firmly as the maid pulls the cords. Breathing feels different, not impossible, but guided, shallow. Your posture straightens. Shoulders are drawn back. It is not a garment to relax in, but it is not meant to be. It is the first act of discipline, a shaping of the body into the image society demands. After the corset comes the crinoline, a structure that defines the silhouette of the era. In 1860, skirts were wide, bell-shaped, made possible by a cage of steel hoops joined by tapes of cotton. Earlier generations had endured layers of heavy petticoats to achieve such breadth, but by mid-century, the crinoline had replaced weight with structure. It could be cumbersome, knocking against furniture, making doorways awkward, yet it was lighter than the piles of cloth it displaced. To step into a crinoline is to step into a framework, a cage that expands space around your body, whether you wish it or not. Over the crinoline come the petticoats, sometimes starched for fullness, sometimes quilted for warmth. Each adds volume, swish, and a modesty that prevents the steel hoops from showing through. Their fabrics rustle with movement, a soft accompaniment to every step you take. Then comes the gown itself. In 1860, the prevailing style favored a fitted bodice with a high waistline. often buttoned or hooked at the front, paired with the voluminous skirt spread by the crinoline beneath. Day dresses were typically of wool, cotton, or silk, depending on wealth. Colors leaned toward the practical browns, grays, plaids, and sober patterns for most. Bright dyes existed, but they were costly, and fashion did not permit frivolity for everyday wear. Sleeves were long, fitted or slightly full at the wrist, for modesty demanded coverage. A shawl or mantle might be added, depending on the weather. Gloves, too, were an expectation not merely to keep hands warm, but as a barrier between bare skin and the public world. To appear gloveless was to risk being judged as careless, or worse, immodest. And there were accessories. The hair must be dressed combed, oiled lightly, twisted into braids or coils, pinned neatly at the back of the head. Loose hair was for the private sphere, not the public. To step beyond the door with hair untidy would be akin to stepping outside barefoot. A bonnet might be required, stiffened with straw or shaped with wire, tied firmly under the chin. The process of all this could take an hour or more, particularly if one had the help of a maid. For women without servants, it was slower still, a daily negotiation with buttons, laces, pins, and hooks. And throughout it all, there was the constant reminder of what it meant. Not simply clothing, but duty. A Victorian woman's dress proclaimed respectability, chastity, industriousness. Even the plainest seamstress in London was expected to maintain a standard of appearance that showed order and propriety. As you move through each layer, you cannot help but notice the weight. The corset presses in, the skirts balloon outward, the petticoats brush heavily against your legs. Movement becomes deliberate, measured. To sit requires arranging the skirts carefully. To pass through a doorway requires turning slightly sideways. Even walking changes. A woman dressed in the fashion of 1860 could not stride. She could only glide, her steps shortened, her pace moderated by the sheer mechanics of fabric. Clothing shaped not only the body, but the very rhythm of daily life. It is tempting to think of these layers as oppressive, yet for women of the era they were ordinary, unquestioned. They carried the same familiarity as denim and sneakers might. In the modern day, complaints arose only when garments were ill-fitted, or when fashions shifted too quickly for purses to keep up. But most accepted the ritual of dressing as a simple fact of existence, as routine as breathing. There were distinctions. Of class, of course. A wealthy woman might wear silk trimmed with velvet. Her gowns changed twice or 3 times a day to suit the hour or activity. Her corsets would be better fitted, her crinolines of finer make. A working-class woman, by contrast, might rely on sturdy wool gowns, fewer layers, perhaps no crinoline at all. Instead, she would wear simpler petticoats, a bodice, and a skirt that allowed her to move with some practicality. Still, the expectation of neatness remained across classes. Respectability was a currency all could aspire to, even if the gowns themselves varied in richness. By the time you were dressed, hair arranged, and gloves pulled on, the morning is half gone. Yet you have not left the room. This was the nature of life in 1860. Time consumed by preparation, rituals of cleanliness, and dress that were neither swift nor optional. You pause at the mirror above the washstand, the glass imperfect, its surface rippled with the flaws of 19th century manufacturing. Your reflection looks back at you, strange and familiar. The face is yours, but the frame is foreign corseted, gloved, bonnets, strings, brushing your jaw. You are a Victorian woman, and to step beyond the threshold of the room now is to enter her world fully. Yet before you descend the stairs, before breakfast awaits, a thought arises. With all these constraints of dress, of movement, of expectation, what choices will you truly have in this day, in this life? You are dressed. The laces have been tied, the corset drawn firm, the skirts layered and arranged, the bonnet strings tied beneath your chin. What began in stillness, in the solitude of a cold bedroom, now moves outward. You must step into the rest of the house, where the rhythms of a Victorian morning are already in motion. The first sound you notice upon opening the door is the creak of stairs, polished by years of footsteps. A faint draught drifts upward from the hallway, carrying with it the mingled scents of coal smoke, damp stone, and the first preparations for the day's meals. Someone below has stirred the fire in the kitchen hearth. The crackle of wood beneath coal is steady, purposeful, the kind of sound that marks the start of industry. The household, like most in 1860, is a structure of routines layered one upon the other. At its heart lies work seen and unseen. Servants, if the family is fortunate enough to employ them, begin earliest. A maid has already risen before dawn, shivering as she lit the kitchen fire, then scurried room to room to clean. Grates, fetch coal, and empty ashes. Another servant has perhaps carried up a jug of hot water, though the lingering chill of your picture suggests that in this house luxuries are measured carefully. The scullery maid will be washing pots, the cook bent over the first round of porridge. Descending the staircase, you pause at the banister. The polished wood is smooth beneath your gloved hand. Walls are papered in muted florals, a continuation of the bedroom's modest theme. Gas lamps line the hall, but at this hour their mantles are extinguished. Daylight, weak though it is, filters through narrow windows, casting the house in pale grey light. The morning room, or breakfast room, if the house is so designated, is your destination. Here the family gathers before the day scatters them. The furniture is solid, dark mahogany or oak, chairs with stiff backs, a long table set with white cloth. Against one wall rests a sideboard, upon which dishes have been laid out. The effect is orderly, but not yet lively. The air still holds the hush of morning. Breakfast in 1860 was both practical and revealing. For the middle classes, it was not the elaborate social performance of the Victorian dinner, but it was far from negligible. It marked the first communal moment of the day, a chance to display propriety even in domesticity. On the table, you might see a pot of porridge steaming gently, a jug of milk brought up fresh by the milkman, a dish of eggs perhaps, their shells still speckled from the hen. Bread lies in a basket, the crusts dark from the baker's oven, to be eaten with butter or jam. If the household is prosperous, rashers of bacon or kippers might appear, their smoky aroma filling the room. Tea, of course, is indispensable, its leaves brewed strong in a china pot, poured into delicate cups with saucers. Sugar, though imported and costly, is now widely available, and cubes may rest in a small silver dish, to be taken with tongs. The act of eating is measured. There is no idle chatter at first. Knives and forks are used carefully, manners kept precise. The toast is buttered slowly, tea stirred gently. For you, Newly awoken in this body and era, the weight of these rituals presses as much as the corset. Beneath your gown, conversation, when it begins, follows patterns. News from the newspaper, fetched earlier from a vendor or delivered by a boy, is read aloud. Its pages smell of ink and coal smoke. Headlines may cover politics debates in Parliament, or the progress of the American Civil War across the Atlantic. Advertisements for patent medicines, sewing machines, or new railway routes line the margins. Household matters are discussed, errands to be run, visits to be made, letters to be written. Each topic is addressed with the rhythm of duty, not of leisure. When the meal concludes, the table is cleared by a maid. The family disperses. Men often turn to business, either travelling into the city by omnibus or railway, or settling into a study to conduct correspondence. Women remain in the domestic sphere, their tasks centered around management. And so you rise from the table, skirts rustling, and move toward the household's inner world of work. A Victorian woman's morning was seldom idle. Even in households with servants, much of her energy was devoted to oversight. The accounts must be examined. The household ledger, thick with columns of figures, records, expenditures on food, coal, wages, and repairs. Every penny is tracked. For thrift is a virtue, and extravagance a risk to reputation. Letters must be read and replied to, invitations considered, purchases planned. There may be a trip to a draper's shop later in the day to purchase fabric, or to the grocer to select tea and flour. Each of these requires preparation, gloves, bonnets, parasols. But before stepping outside, the house itself must be surveyed. You walk through its rooms, noting the state of the fires, the polish of the furniture, the neatness of the carpets. Cold dust settles quickly, requiring daily sweeping. The air carries faint traces of damp, for many houses in London suffered from poor ventilation. You remind the maid to open a window, just a crack, to let in fresh air, though the chill makes it uncomfortable. Beyond chores, there are the subtler duties of reputation. Calling cards must be arranged, ready to be delivered to acquaintances. Visits must be scheduled, not too long nor too brief, their timing balanced to show both respect and restraint. The rhythm of Victorian social life pulses quietly beneath even the humblest routine. For a woman's place in society depended not only on wealth, but also on careful adherence to custom. The clock ticks steadily. It is still morning, but already so much has been done: washing, dressing, breakfast, the first oversight of the home. The day stretches ahead, filled with obligations. Yet for the moment, the household breathes in a kind of order. Fires are burning. Water is heating. The postman will soon arrive with letters. The maid polishes the silver in the dining room. The cook kneads dough in the kitchen. The very air hums with activity, steady, relentless, ordinary. You find yourself pausing at the parlor window. Outside, the street bustles, more now than when you first rose. A sweep's boy darts past, his face dark with soot, carrying his brushes. A milk cart rattles by, glass bottles clinking. Women hurry with baskets, bound for the market. Gentlemen stride with umbrellas tucked beneath their arms, hats set firmly on their heads. A dog trots behind a cart, its paws muddy. It is an ordinary morning in 1860. Nothing dramatic has happened. Yet the quiet accumulation of these details defines the world you are in. To live in such a time was to accept the constant work of routine, dressing, eating, supervising, planning, each act dull in itself, yet together forming the architecture of a life. You turn back from the window, the bonnet still on your head, gloves smoothed neatly on your hands. The house waits, the day waits, the world waits. You have stepped out of the bedroom and into the larger fabric of existence in 1860. But one question lingers, as it must at the close of this first story. If so much of a Victorian woman's life was shaped by ritual, by duty, by expectations beyond her choosing, then what space remained for her own desires, her own freedoms, her own voice? The day begins, as it always must, with the cold touch of air against bare skin. In 1860, a woman's body greeted the morning not with the softness of jersey fabrics or elastic waistbands, but with linen, cotton, and ties. Dressing was not a casual act, it was a ritual of construction, a deliberate layering that transformed the private, vulnerable self into the public figure the world demanded. You stand in the bedroom, hair brushed back from your face, the water from the porcelain, basin still damp against your skin. Before you lies a chair with a neat stack of garments prepared the night before. This is not indulgence, but necessity. To dress in Victorian fashion required planning, forethought, and often assistance. The first garment is the chemise. It is simple, white, and unadorned except perhaps for a touch of lace along the neckline. Made of cotton or linen, it serves as the innermost shield between your body and the many layers to come. You slip it over your head. The fabric is cool, a little stiff from laundering, and it settles over your shoulders with a whisper of folds. The chemise is loose, straight, and unshaped, falling just past the knees. Its purpose is not beauty, but protection to absorb sweat and oils, to spare the corset from direct contact with skin, to be washed and boiled again and again while the costlier garments remain unsoiled. Next come the drawers, a relatively recent introduction in women's wardrobes. Before the 19th century, many women went without them, but by 1860 they had become common. These are split drawers, open at the center seam for convenience, tied at the waist with a narrow band. You step into them carefully, drawing the fabric up over your legs, securing the ties. They are plain, yet strangely significant, a reminder that modesty was constructed as much in fabric as in thought. The open seam, practical for visits to the chamber pot, speaks quietly of the realities of the body even in an age obsessed with covering it. Over chemise and drawers comes the corset, though not yet tightened. It lies on the bed like an object of both discipline and craftsmanship. Made of cotton or silk, stiffened with whalebone, its shape is firm, curved, insistent. To put it on is to step into the defining silhouette of the era. You wrap it around, your body hooking the busk at the front, then turning for the laces at the back. If you are fortunate, another pair of hands assist sisters, a maid, a mother. The laces pull tighter, drawing the fabric snug against your ribs. The first tug compresses gently, the next more firmly. Your breath shifts, shorter but not unbearable. The waistline narrows, the body is sculpted. It is not the violent titlacing of caricature, but even ordinary lacing reminds you that your body is not entirely your own. The corset straightens your posture, your shoulders fall back, your spine steadies. The garment does not merely support, it instructs. To where it is, to be reminded of your role, your bearing, your place in society. The stays press against you with quiet insistence, saying, stand tall, sit upright, be composed. Over the corset, another layer, the chemsette or corset cover. A light piece of fabric designed to soften the line of the corset beneath outer clothing. You slip it on, its ties closing at the throat. Modesty is achieved not only by concealment, but by smoothing, by erasing the outline of underpinnings so that the dress above falls in flawless drapery. Now the petticoats begin. To the modern eye, they may seem excessive, but each serves its role in creating the architecture of a gown. The first petticoat is plain, perhaps quilted, providing warmth and bulk. The next may be stiffer, starched to help the skirt spread. With each layer, the shape of your body shifts, expanding outward. The waist a firm point of narrowness above a widening bell. If the household can afford it, and if fashion is followed faithfully, a crinoline is added. By 1860, the cage crinoline has become widespread, a marvel of steel hoops and fabric tapes. Light yet voluminous, replacing the multiple heavy petticoats of earlier decades. It stands on the floor like a skeletal bell, waiting to be stepped into. You lift your skirts and settle inside it, fastening the waistband. The hoops spring outward, surrounding you with a circumference of air and steel. The sensation is peculiar, as if you have acquired a space around your body that no one may cross. Walking will require care, sitting, strategy. Yet the crinoline is a liberation of sorts. It distributes the weight once borne by countless layers of cloth. Already the transformation is evident. The figure in the mirror is no longer a woman in a nightdress, but a silhouette recognizable from fashion plates and engravings. A cinched waist, broad skirts, narrow shoulders. The body has been restructured into a social form. And still, these are only the first layers. The outer garments, bodice, gown, jacket, bonnet remain for later. For now, you stand surrounded by rustling fabric, the sound of linen and cotton brushing with each movement. The weight is noticeable, the heat beginning to gather, but the effect is undeniable. You are dressed, not yet in public finery, but in the essential scaffolding upon which the rest will be built. What is striking, as you consider each layer, is not only the physical sensation, but the philosophy behind it. Each garment performs a function: modesty, hygiene, support, silhouette, warmth. Together, they speak of a society that valued structure and order even upon the body itself. To be a woman in 1860 was to live inside a series of boundaries: fabric against skin, laces against ribs, hoops encircling legs, propriety enclosing self. The act of dressing was the daily rehearsal of that truth. You breathe carefully. The corsets embrace firm but not cruel, and smooth your hands over the linen of your chemise. The garments whisper against each other. The day is only beginning, and yet you are already armored in fabric, shaped by society's hand. Soon will come the bodice, the gown, the outer world of appearances. But for this first section, you linger in the intimate space of beginnings, the garments closest to the skin, the unseen foundation of every public image. The foundations are in place. Your chemise whispers against your skin, your drawers tied neatly, the corset pulled snug and steady, the cage crinoline standing in its peculiar orbit about your legs. Petticoats swish softly, adding warmth and structure, softening the steel hoops into a smooth bell. You have been prepared, piece by piece, for the moment that transforms undergarments into attire. Now comes the gown itself, the true face you will show to the world. On the chair beside you lies a carefully folded dress, its fabric gleaming faintly in the muted morning light. It is not the gown of evening finery, dripping with silk and trimmed with velvet, but the respectable day dress of 1860, practical yet precise. Fashion in this decade demands fullness, symmetry, and above all, careful construction. What you wear speaks not only of yourself, but of your household, your station, your propriety. The gown is not a single piece, but a composition. Skirt and bodice are often cut separately, to be joined at the waist by hooks, eyes, or tapes. This allows variety and interchange. A woman may own several bodices to be worn with the same skirt, adapting to different times of day or occasions without the expense of a completely new dress. The skirt is the first to be fastened. It is voluminous, heavy with pleats, made to spread evenly over the crinoline's hoops. A waistband, stiffened and strong, carries the weight of yards upon yards of fabric. You lift the skirt carefully, gathering its folds, and step within its circle. With practiced hands, you fasten it at the waist. Instantly, the shape changes. The petticoats and cage no longer stand as bare scaffolding, but bloom with the drapery of color and pattern. Stripes radiate around the circumference, or perhaps a floral print meanders across the folds. What had been merely framework now becomes fashion. The fastening of the skirt is a practical art. Hooks and eyes must align. Tapes must tie securely, and the weight must be distributed evenly. Too loose, and the garment may sag. Too tight, and the waistband pinches cruelly against the corset. When done properly, it feels almost natural, as if the skirt has settled into its rightful place. You smooth the folds with your hands, arranging them so they fall evenly. Each pleat is intentional. Each curve of fabric is meant to complement the silhouette demanded by the season's style. Once the skirt is secure, the bodice awaits. It lies flat at first glance, yet it is the most intricate element of the gown. Shaped to fit over the corseted torso, it is narrow at the waist, structured across the bust, and cut to maintain perfect posture. No modern garment is quite like it. The bodice of 1860 is not something you slip into, it is something that clasps and molds itself around you. You take it in your hands. Perhaps it is made of the same fabric as the skirt, completing the harmony of a single dress. Or perhaps it is of contrasting material, a darker wool for day, while the skirt is of lighter cotton. Inside, seams are reinforced, boning inserted to keep the front smooth and unwrinkled. The neckline may be high and modest for morning, or slightly lower for afternoon visits, edged with lace or braid. Sleeves, too, have their variety, narrow and tight, or wide at the wrist with delicate pagoda flares, slipping your arms into the sleeves. You feel the close fit of the bodice settling against the corset. The garment is meant to follow the shape, already dictated by the stays, not to create its own. Hooks run down the front, or sometimes buttons, each one requiring care. They must be fastened in perfect order, for the slightest misalignment will betray itself in a crooked seam. If you have help, fingers other than your own draw the bodice tight, smoothing each edge into place. Alone, you fumble a little, but practice has taught you the motions. One by one, the fastenings close, until the bodice is sealed firmly over your torso. The effect is transformative. Where the chemise and petticoats had felt loose, even homely, the bodice is tailored, deliberate, commanding. It defines your waist more sharply than the corset alone. It raises your chest, squares your shoulders, composes your bearing. You glance in the mirror, and the figure reflected back is no longer a body in progress, but a complete silhouette. Narrow waist, bell-shaped skirt, straight spine. You are clothed, fully, in the language of your age. But dressing is not merely fastening cloth. It is an art of arrangement. Over skirt and bodice, additional layers may be required. An overskirt draped for effect, a decorative apron of silk, or lace officieux crossed at the neckline for modesty. Accessories are part of the ensemble. A belt with its buckle, a brooch at the throat, ribbons at the wrists. Each small choice alters the impression. Too plain, and you risk seeming careless. Too ornate, and you flirt with ostentation. The balance is delicate, and every woman is judged upon it. As you smooth the bodice, you are aware of the discipline imposed by such clothing. The waist is fixed, the shoulders restrained, the arms defined by the sleeves. Movement is possible, yet it is shaped. To sit, you must gather the skirts carefully, lest they billow uncontrollably. To walk, you must step with consideration, for the cage crinoline swings wide with each motion. To bend is almost impossible. The clothing does not adapt to you, you adapt to it. This is, in truth, the deeper purpose of the gown, not merely to cover, but to mold behavior. A woman dressed in such fashion cannot slouch, cannot sprawl, cannot dash about. She is compelled to inhabit her body with composure. The garments insist upon dignity, restraint, decorum. Even within the privacy of the home, the structure of the gown is a constant reminder of the posture expected in the drawing room. The parlor, the street dot. The fastening of the bodice is also the fastening of identity. To dress in 1860 is to join. The collective image of Victorian womanhood, to take one's place in a society where clothing speaks as loudly as words. A neatly arranged gown tells of respectability. A misaligned seam may hint at neglect. The very act of being properly dressed is a declaration of belonging. When all is settled, the skirts smoothed, the bodice fitted, the ribbons tied you pause. The mirror shows you a figure at once familiar and strange. Familiar because you know the feel of these layers against your body. Strange because you also remember the moment, not so long ago, when you stood in a simple chemise, hair unbound, skin touched only by water and air. Between that intimacy and this public presentation lies an astonishing transformation. Fabric has reshaped you, drawn you into a silhouette, spoken on your behalf. You take a step, the skirts rustle, the crinoline shifts, the bodice holds you. Straight, the room feels smaller now, your presence occupying space not with flesh, but with fabric. You are ready, not yet for the world beyond the door, but for the final refinements, the outer layers that shield against weather and complete. The costume of the day, yet already, with skirt and bodice in place, you are no longer simply yourself. You are an emblem of your time, dressed in the art and discipline of 1860. What remains is only to complete the picture, to add the shawl, the mantle, the bonnet, the gloves. But those are for the next stage of dressing. For now, you stand at the threshold of transformation, clothed in the gown that makes you visible to the eyes of others. The gown is secure, its bodice fitted close, its skirts spread wide and even. Already you are shaped into the silhouette of your decade, your figure molded by fabric and whalebone, by steel hoops and hidden laces. Yet, as you stand before the mirror in 1860, you are not finished. To be considered dressed in the eyes of society is not merely to wear a gown, but to complete the picture with those outer touches that render the whole both proper and expressive. The finishing layers are more than accessories. They are mediators between private and public, between the home and the street, between the woman herself and the eyes that will inevitably fall upon her. Each item carries meaning, warmth, modesty, respectability, elegance. To put them on is to cloak oneself not only in fabric but in expectation. The shawl is often the first of these additions. It lies folded at the ready, a square or rectangle of rich wool or embroidered silk, sometimes fringed at the edges, sometimes bordered with paisley patterns that speak of faraway India. In earlier decades, the shawl was an indispensable part of a lady's attire, and though fashions shift, it remains in 1860 a mark of taste and decency. You lift it carefully and settle it about your shoulders. Depending on its cut, it may drape in a neat triangle across your back, or hang straight in long folds that almost graze the fullness of your skirt. The shawl softens the rigidity of the gown, tempering its sharp lines with a draped fluidity. It is warmth against morning chill, but it is also gentility, a gesture of modest concealment even over a high-necked bodice. You adjust it so that the fringe falls evenly, the corners symmetrical dot. Next comes the bonnet. No woman of respectability would venture outdoors with her head uncovered. In 1860, the bonnet is still a reigning form of headwear, though it has grown, smaller and more delicate than in earlier years. Once wide and shielding, now it frames the face more closely, tied beneath the chin with ribbons that flutter against the neck. Your bonnet rests on the dressing table, waiting to crown the ensemble. Perhaps it is straw, trimmed with velvet ribbon. Perhaps it is silk, its brim decorated with artificial flowers, its interior lined with lace to soften the face. You take it in your hands and lower it carefully, tucking it over your styled hair. A bonnet is not slipped on like a cap. It is positioned, tilted just so, to flatter the line of jaw and cheek. Once in place, you lift the ribbons, smooth them, and tie them in a bow beneath your chin. The effect is gentle, yet commanding. The bonnet frames your countenance like a portrait frame, declaring the face as the central image society will see. Gloves are next. A woman's hands in public must never appear bare, save perhaps in the most informal of settings. Gloves are both shield and signal. They protect the skin, but they also proclaim refinement. To wear them is to announce that one's hands are not calloused by labor, that they are hands devoted to grace rather than toil. You draw them on carefully, finger by finger, pulling the soft kid leather or, perhaps, cotton. If the mourning is practical over your wrists, the fit is close, almost a second skin. Gloves, like the corset, are at once restrictive and elegant. They hide blemishes, enforce composure, and limit gesture. To wave, to shake hands, to touch the world All is done through this fine barrier. Yet in their delicacy, gloves also invite. Notice they are often stitched with detail, trimmed at the wrist, cut to match the gown. As you flex your fingers within them, you feel yourself once again bound and refined, movement tempered by the demands of propriety. At last comes the mantle, or outdoor cloak. In 1860, outerwear varies widely in fashion. It may be a cape-like mantle of wool, trimmed with braid, a paletot with sleeves, fitted to the waist and flaring over the skirt, or a simple cloak, cut generously to cover the fullness of the crinoline. Beneath it, whichever form it takes, it is the indispensable shield between gown and weather. Your mantle waits on a hook, dark against the pale wall. You lift it and drape it around your shoulders, adjusting its fall so it sits evenly over the width of your skirts. Hooks may fasten it at the throat, or a clasp may secure it with shining metal. Some are lined with fur for winter chill, others with quilted silk for lighter seasons. As it settles into place, you feel the reassuring weight of the garment close. The mantle changes your silhouette once again. The bodice beneath is hidden, the gown's details muted. What remains is outline, shape, and presence. The outer garment does not erase the gown, but it announces your readiness for the world. Outside, just as armor covers a knight's tunic, the mantle shields the vulnerable intricacy beneath. Now the ensemble is complete. You glance toward the mirror, and the reflection that meets your eyes is transformed from the half-dressed figure of an hour ago into a vision entirely prepared for society's gaze. Layers upon layers compose this image. Chemise, corset, crinoline, petticoats, gown, shawl, bonnet, gloves, mantle. The body beneath is hidden, disciplined, redefined. What shows is not the private self, but the public self, polished into an emblem of respectability. To step out now is to enter a stage, where every passerby is an audience, every gesture observed. The bonnet frames the face as if to exhibit it. The gloves signal refinement, the shawl conveys modesty, the mantle declares readiness. The clothing speaks continuously, even in silence. You are not simply a woman, you are a Victorian woman, a figure of her age, expressed through fabric and fastening, and yet, beneath it all, you are still aware of the feel of linen chemise against your skin, of the corset's steady pressure, of the gentle sway of hoops as you move. Clothing is not merely a surface, but a constant sensation. To wear such garments is to live within them, to be shaped by them hour by hour, breath by breath. The final touches are not trivial. They are the very line between indoors and out, between privacy and publicity. Within the home, you may loosen a ribbon, slip off a glove, let a shawl fall aside. But to cross the threshold into the street without them would be unthinkable. They are your shield, your statement, your social passport. At the door, with bonnet tied, mantle fastened, gloves fitted, shawl adjusted, you are ready. You gather the skirts in your gloved hand, careful not to crush the folds, and prepare to descend into the day. The dressing is complete. The self you show to the world is finished. Beyond lies the street, the carriage, the eyes of neighbors, the scrutiny of strangers. You step forward, carrying with you not only fabric, but centuries of expectation, discipline, and identity. For a moment you linger, feeling the weight of all you wear, the way each layer binds you to your time. You are dressed, At last, as a Victorian woman in 1860, the morning begins not with warmth, but with chill. In 1860, there is no central heating that spreads a gentle comfort through every room. No running hot water to greet you at a turn of the tap. Instead, the ritual of waking is bound to the realities of the season, the house, and the body. For a Victorian woman, the day's first moments are marked by the encounter with water cold, waiting, still. Collected the night before or carried up by a servant at dawn. The bed is left reluctantly, for the sheets hold what little warmth the night has allowed. You draw a shawl or wrapper about your shoulders and make your way to the washstand. That simple but indispensable piece of bedroom furniture. It stands in quiet readiness, a small wooden table or cabinet, its surface holding a porcelain basin, a jug, a sliver of soap in a dish, and a folded towel. To modern eyes it seems austere, almost severe, but to the Victorian woman it is a daily altar to cleanliness, modesty, and discipline. The jug of water, filled the night before, is cool to the touch. You lift it with both hands, feeling its weight, and pour into the basin. The sound is soft yet distinct, the clear stream falling into porcelain with a hollow note. The surface ripples, and for a moment you watch it settle into stillness, the thin mist of coolness rising from it. This is the water that will wake you more surely than any dream's end. Soap, too, is ready. It is not the perfumed bar of later ages, but a simple cake, sometimes scented faintly with lavender, sometimes plain, its shape worn down by daily use. Soap in 1860 is practical but treasured, for it carries not only cleansing power, but also a certain status. To wash is to be respectable, to keep the body in order, to declare that you are not careless but civilized. Cleanliness is morality made visible. The first contact is bracing. You cup the water in your hands, lower your face, and press the coldness. To your skin, eyes sting open, cheeks tingle, breath sharpens. The shock is never lessened, however many mornings you endure it. There is no question of warm comfort. The basin holds only what the jug has given, untouched by fire or pipe. It is discipline more than pleasure, and yet within that discipline there is a peculiar invigoration, a reminder of one's vitality. You dip the cloth's soft linen or cotton, often hemmed by hand, into the basin and wring it out. With it, you begin the slow ritual of wiping down face, neck, hands, and arms. The cloth carries the chill, but it also carries the reassurance of order. Each stroke is a gesture of renewal, a way of brushing away the heaviness of sleep. This is not a bath, which is reserved for occasional days and involves far more effort and arrangement. This is the daily ablution, small yet steady, a mark of respect for self and for the day to come. The soap is worked into the cloth, lather rising thinly, and you pass it again over your skin. There is no abundance of bubbles, but the faint fragrance lingers. You rinse, you wipe again, you pat dry with the towel that waits neatly folded. At every stage, you are aware of the economy of movement. Water is precious. Linens must not be soaked through. Every gesture has been learned and repeated until it carries the rhythm of ritual. Hair, too, receives its share of attention. The cloth is drawn along the brow, the temples, the nape. Stray locks dampen, curl against the cool air. A comb will follow, but first the hair is freshened, soothed from the night's impressions. To cleanse the face and hairline is to mark the boundary between sleep's disarray and waking order. Hands are washed last, for they will soon be put to use. Fingers are dipped, rubbed together with soap, rinsed and dried. Gloves may hide them. Later, but in this private hour, the hands are tended as instruments of daily labor and expression. A woman's hands are watched, judged, admired or dismissed. To wash them well is to preserve not only hygiene but also grace. When the towel is folded back and laid neatly over the washstand's rail, the ritual has reached its end. The water in the basin is clouded now, no longer pristine, bearing witness to its work. Some women will pour it away, some leave it for a servant to carry. Either way, the act is complete. The woman is refreshed, prepared for dressing, and restored to the composure that society expects of her. Yet beyond the visible cleanliness lies something deeper. This morning ritual, repeated endlessly across years, shapes not only the body but the mind. It is an act of submission to order, a rehearsal of discipline. The cold water teaches resilience. The soap declares morality. The neat folding of towel and cloth instills propriety. In this way, the woman does not simply wash herself, she prepares herself to be Victorian. When at last she turns from the washstand, skin tingling, hair dampened, eyes brightened, she has crossed the threshold from private slumber into public readiness. The basin has done its work. The day may now begin. The basin has been used, the face washed, the hands refreshed, and the towel neatly folded back into its waiting place. Yet the morning ritual is not finished. To a Victorian woman of 1860, the transition from private slumber to public readiness required not only the cleansing of skin, but also the careful tending of hair, the discreet yet necessary care of the teeth and the small. Deliberate touches of grooming that set her apart as respectable, orderly, and prepared for the day. If the water had startled her into wakefulness, it is the hairbrush and comb that now begin the longer work of restoring order to the self. Victorian hair was never merely a matter of vanity. It was a crowning symbol of womanhood, a mark of identity, modesty, and virtue. To let it fall into tangles or appear unkempt was not simply neglect, it was a breach of respectability. Thus, no matter how heavy the head may still feel from dreams, or how reluctant the body may be to rise fully into day, the hair must be attended. The woman sits before her small mirror orphan, an oval set within a wooden frame. Its glass not always, without flaws, for mirrors of the period often wavered or clouded at the edges. She takes up her comb, sometimes bone, sometimes wood, sometimes ivory if the household is prosperous. With deliberate patience, she draws it through her hair, strand by strand. Victorian hair, often worn long, required untangling from the nights. Rest, the comb lifts and separates, catches, and is pulled gently free again. Beside the comb, the brush waits. Unlike the quick bristles of later ages, these brushes are crafted with care wooden handles. Natural bristles, sometimes set in silver, mountings for those of greater means. The brush is not simply a tool of neatness. It is believed to stimulate the scalp, to bring health to the hair itself. The common instruction was to brush hair a full 100 strokes, a ritual that mingled patience with discipline. Each sweep draws the hair into shining alignment, while also offering a kind of meditation. The woman bends her head slightly, brushing down along the long locks, then drawing the brush up again, a rhythm steady as a prayer. The hair, once freed of its night's knots, is parted and arranged, depending on the woman's age, station, and taste. It may be divided at the center, smoothed down along either side, and drawn into a coil or plait at the back. Simplicity in the morning is the rule. The elaborate constructions of evening are reserved for later, but even simplicity must be precise. Stray wisps are smoothed, pins are used with economy, and the comb may be employed once again to define the neatness of the part. To be respectable is to be controlled, and no part of the Victorian woman's body spoke more silently yet more insistently of her control than her hair. When hair is set aside and secured, the next attention turns to the mouth. Dentistry in 1860 is not what we know today, and yet the Victorians were far from ignorant of its importance. White, sound teeth were considered not only attractive, but essential to health and morality. Decay was not simply unsightly. It was a visible sign of neglect, of carelessness, even of a lack of character. Thus, on the washstand or nearby shelf, the woman keeps her implements. Toothbrushes of the time, though less uniform than those of our modern day, had already taken, on a familiar form, small wooden or bone handles, with bristles set into the head. These bristles, often made of boar hair, were stiff, sometimes even uncomfortable, but they did their duty. Dipped into a small tin or jar of powder, the brush became the instrument of cleanliness. The powder itself varied. For those of modest means, it might be simple chalk or salt, rubbed into the bristles and scrubbed against the teeth. For those of higher station, there were powders scented with peppermint, clove, or even myrrh, believed to sweeten the breath as well as whiten. The enamel, whatever the mixture, the act was the same. The brush raised, the powder applied, and the teeth scrubbed with determination. It was not gentle work. The bristles were stiff, the taste often harsh, yet to neglect it was unthinkable. One's mouth must be as orderly as one's hair. After brushing, the woman might rinse with fresh water from the jug, letting the coolness wash away the powder, spitting discreetly into the basin. There were also mouth rinses, sometimes simple water infused, with herbs, sometimes mixtures bought from apothecaries, promising sweetness of breath and vigor of gums, whether plain or perfumed. The rinse was considered a final safeguard against the offense of foul breath, that most unpardonable of social failings. Once the teeth were clean, the woman might check her lips, dabbing them lightly with a cloth, or applying a faint layer of salve. These salves, often beeswax mixed with oil, sometimes tinted very slightly, kept the lips from cracking in winter's cold or drying in the heat of summer. To wear color openly in the day was frowned upon. It suggested artifice, theatricality, even impropriety. But a whisper of protection, faint enough to escape notice, was permissible. Respectability allowed care, so long as it was discreet. The grooming continues with the nails. Victorian women did not paint their nails, nor did they seek the polished shine of later centuries. Instead, they sought neatness. A small nail brush, stiff and narrow, might be used to scrub the fingertips. The nails themselves were shaped short, kept smooth with a file. Stains from ink or kitchen tasks were rubbed away with lemon juice or vinegar, leaving the hands white and plain. Gloves would cover them in public, but beneath the gloves, the nails must speak of restraint, modesty, and care. The brows, too, might be smoothed. Tweezers existed. though they were not used to sculpt arches as later ages did. Instead, they plucked only the most unruly strays, ensuring that the brow remained even and respectable. The face as a whole was expected to be natural, yet tidy. A little rice powder, perhaps, was dusted lightly over the skin to soften shine and absorb moisture. It gave the complexion a faint, velvety paleness, the image of modest refinement. Each of these touches hair brushed and coiled, teeth scrubbed, lips salved, nails smoothed, complexion powdered was small in itself, but together they formed a ritual of transformation. The Victorian woman did not rise from bed and tumble directly into her gown. She prepared herself, step by patient step, until she was no longer the drowsy figure of the early dawn, but the ordered, presentable woman whom society required. And in this sequence of gestures there was both discipline and identity. For while they may seem, to modernize, minor, they carried the weight of culture. A woman who failed to wash her hair, who neglected her teeth, who let her nails grow ragged or her lips dry and cracked, such a woman was not merely careless of herself, she was careless of her duty to the world. Cleanliness, neatness, restraint. These were virtues written upon the body, silently proclaiming her worthiness. When the last brushstroke has been made, the final pin fixed, the mouth rinsed, the lips smoothed, the hands dried, the mirror checked once more, she is ready. Not yet dressed, not yet adorned with gown and bonnet and gloves, but inwardly prepared. The body has been restored to order, the self has been gathered from sleep into composure. It is the quiet labor of respectability, the unseen work behind every public appearance. Now, with her hair set, her teeth cleaned, her lips softened, and her complexion smoothed, she rises from the small mirror and turns toward the wardrobe. The next stage awaits. The ritual of dressing, with its layers and fastenings, its shaping and its symbolism. But she enters that stage already transformed. For without this private work of washing, brushing, and grooming, the gown would fall upon a self unprepared. Thus ends the second movement of the morning ritual, the care of hair, teeth, and grooming. Tomorrow it will be the same, as yesterday it was the same. Day upon day, year upon year, the basin, the brush, the comb, and the powder shape not only the body but the woman herself, binding her quietly into the rhythm of Victorian life. The hair has been brushed into order, the teeth scrubbed with their chalky powders, the nails smoothed, and the face discreetly dusted. Yet in the Victorian imagination, cleanliness was not only what could be seen, it was also what might be sensed, drifting invisibly into the air around a woman as she moved through her household or ventured into the street. To appear respectable meant to appear fresh, and freshness was both visible and invisible. It lived not only in combed locks and orderly nails, but in the subtle cloud of scent and powder that completed the transformation from the private, sleepy figure of dawn into the composed lady of day. The little table by the washstand now comes into play once again. Beside the brush and basin, a collection of bottles, jars, and small cloth pouches wait. Some of these vessels are plain glass, stoppered with cork. Others, in wealthier houses, gleam with cut crystal or sit in silver trays. Each contains a different preparation: rose water in its tall vial, violet water in its small flask, perhaps even lavender water, kept tightly closed to preserve its pungency. These waters were not perfumes in the modern sense. They were simple distillations of flower petals, herbs, or leaves, light, refreshing, and meant to suggest purity rather than opulence. A drop or two upon a cloth could be dabbed at the temples, behind the ears, or along the throat. A splash upon the hands might be rubbed briskly into the skin. A touch could even be applied to the hair, so that, as the day passed, a faint fragrance lingered. The goal was not to overwhelm, not to declare, but to suggest a suggestion of cleanliness, a trace of the garden, a whisper of freshness that said nothing more than, "Here is a woman who cares for herself and thus is ready to care for the world around her." For those with finer means, small bottles of cologne or even imported perfume might appear among these morning tools. Eau de Cologne, with its mixture of citrus oils and herbs, was especially popular. But even then, restraint was demanded. A heavy scent was vulgar, almost indecent. A lady must be noticed only for her neatness, never accused of seeking attention. Through her fragrance, the best scent was the one barely detectable, the kind that might be sensed only if one stood very near, as in conversation across the parlor table. Anything more forceful was unladylike, suited more to the actress or the courtesan than the respectable wife or daughter. Once the scent had been chosen and applied, attention often turned to powders. The small box of rice powder, so faint and fine, was used not for vanity but for necessity. The Victorian household was a place of labor, and the Victorian city a place of smoke, dust, and soot. To leave the skin unprotected was to invite shine, perspiration, and the visible marks of toil. The powder softened these, smoothing the complexion and keeping the face pale. Paleness was a marker of gentility. It signaled that one's life was not spent in fields or factories, under the harsh sun or before the smoky fire. It was, in its way, a silent badge of class. The powder puff, a small round cushion wrapped in soft cloth, was tapped gently upon the cheeks, the forehead, the chin. Sometimes the powder was scented faintly, so that the gesture combined the visual with the olfactory, layering modest whiteness with delicate fragrance. The mirror was consulted once again, but only briefly. The point was not transformation into beauty, but confirmation of composure. The neck and chest, where fabric would fall low in some gowns, were sometimes dusted lightly as well. A soft sheen of powder absorbed moisture and left the skin even-toned. Hands, too, might receive a trace of powder before gloves were drawn on. The effect was not visible to the eye of the world, but it created a sense of order for the woman herself. To be powdered was to be prepared, even beneath the clothing that would cover her. Beside the powders were creams and salves. Cold cream, made of almond oil, spermaceti, and rosewater, was a staple. It softened the skin after the roughness of soaps and powders, protected against the dry air of coal-heated rooms, and offered a faintly cooling touch. A dab was rubbed into the cheeks, then wiped gently away with a cloth, leaving a trace of suppleness. There were also ointments for the hands, which, though gloved, often endured tasks of sewing, writing, or tending to children. Beeswax and lanolin kept the knuckles from cracking, the skin from roughening. All these preparations, the scent waters, the powders, the creams formed a kind of invisible armor. They shielded the woman from the harshness of the world outside, her chamber against soot, against the closeness of crowded parlors, against the suspicion of neglect. They provided protection. She would emerge into her household fresh, touched by rose or lavender, with the faint matte finish of rice powder upon her cheeks, the softness of cream upon her hands. The finishing touches of grooming were subtle but essential. Stray hairs were smoothed one last time, pins adjusted to hold the coil secure. A fresh handkerchief, often embroidered with initials, was chosen from the drawer and tucked into readiness. This handkerchief was not only practical but symbolic. It was a token of gentility, something to be displayed discreetly when wiping the brow or dabbing at the lips. Without it, one was incomplete. Sometimes, too, a small brooch or ribbon was fastened in the hair or at the throat. Even before dressing gowns were changed into the day's garments, these ornaments were modest, never flamboyant. A jet pin, a ribbon of black velvet, a cameo upon a plain clasp. They offered a hint of personality within the strictures of respectability. At last, the woman stands and surveys herself in the mirror. The change from sleep is complete. Where once there was the soft, rumpled figure of night, there is now the poised outline of day. The face is calm, the hair secure, the skin freshened, the air faintly perfumed. To her household, when she descends the stair, she will appear as she must, composed, controlled, ready. It is easy, from a distance of centuries, to imagine that such rituals were trivial or burdensome. Yet to the Victorian woman, they carried a deeper significance. In an age when her place in society was measured by appearances of morality, modesty, and self-discipline, these rituals were not luxuries, but necessities. They expressed, in minute detail, her respect for herself and her conformity to the expectations that surrounded her. Cleanliness, restraint, discretion, these were virtues that could not be proclaimed aloud, but they could be read upon her person as clearly as any book. And so the invisible work of scents, powders, and salves was, in truth, a form of speech. It declared silently, I am prepared, I am orderly, I am worthy of respect. Without them, she would feel unfinished, like a letter lacking its seal. With them, she was complete, ready to step from private chamber into public world. Now, with the armor of freshness secured, she turns to the final stage of her ritual, the dressing. Layers of linen, stays, petticoats, gown, and finally the gloves and bonnet await. Yet beneath them all will rest the unseen labor of the morning, the splash of rose water, the veil of powder, the faint fragrance of lavender. These are not for others to remark upon, but for herself to know, and to carry like a hidden strength throughout her day. Thus concludes the third movement of her morning ritual, the scents, powders, and final touches. Tomorrow they will be repeated, as today they were repeated from yesterday. And though each day is the same, each day they transform her anew, returning her from the realm of dreams to the composure of waking life. The Victorian day, for those who lived within comfort, began not only with water and soap in the quiet of the dressing chamber, but with a ritual of food that was as social as it was practical. Breakfast was not merely a plate of nourishment placed before one, it was a performance of household order, of class, of restraint or abundance, depending upon one's station. To walk into the breakfast room of a middle or upper class household in the 19th century was to step into a scene carefully orchestrated to balance appetite with gentility, The first thing one noticed was the table itself. It was rarely bare, white damask cloths, pressed smooth, fell nearly to the floor. The gleam of silver caught the light even in the quiet morning hours. China, whether simple creamware or patterned with florals and gilt, was set in orderly fashion at each place. Glass dishes sometimes sparkled with jams and preserves. Covered dishes, still warm from the kitchen, waited discreetly for their unveiling. Unlike the modern imagination of a hurried meal of coffee and toast, the Victorian breakfast stretched wide, both in time and variety. It was neither the light nibble of a continental breakfast nor the hasty bite of an industrial worker. Instead, for those who could afford it, it was a true repast, almost a ceremony, and yet, unlike the grandeur of a dinner party, it carried the softness of morning. The curtains might be half drawn to filter the light. The fire, if it was winter, would be freshly kindled and glowing, not roaring. The family gathered, not in their evening finery, but in the gentler dress of daytime, still close to the privacy of the home. At the center of this tableau were the dishes themselves. Eggs, in every conceivable form, were a staple. Boiled eggs sat upright in porcelain egg cups, to be tapped gently with a spoon and eaten with tiny toasts. Fried eggs, cooked in butter or dripping, gleamed with their golden yolks beside rashers of bacon. Scrambled eggs, richer and more custard-like than the modern style, were flavored sometimes with cream. For those who favored stronger flavors, deviled eggs might appear, spiced with mustard or anchovy. Alongside the eggs came fish. Kippers split, salted, and smoked herring were a frequent sight. Their scent, strong but savory, drifted through the breakfast room. In some houses, bloater or smoked salmon might be offered. The presence of fish in the morning speaks to Victorian ideas of nourishment, hearty, sustaining, and varied. A day begun with fish and eggs was a day fortified against labor, whether mental or physical. Meat was no stranger to the table. Rushes of bacon were nearly universal, but sausages, cold meats, or even chops might be served in larger households. For the robust appetite, beefsteak and kidneys, grilled or fried, appeared steaming from the kitchen. Such fare might surprise the modern stomach, but to Victorians it was entirely proper. The idea of a substantial breakfast was woven into the fabric of the age. The industrialist, the clergyman, the politician, even the lady of leisure, required a morning meal that announced the day had begun in earnest. And yet, despite this heaviness, there was balance. Bread, in many forms, was always present. Toasted slices stood upright in silver racks, ready to be buttered while still crisp. Muffins, split and toasted, offered soft interiors to be spread with jam. Crumpets, warm and spongy, absorbed butter until they glistened. In country homes, fresh loaves might arrive from the bakehouse each morning. To spread upon these breads came butter, golden and firm, as well as honey, marmalade, and preserves of fruit. Strawberry jam, raspberry conserve, orange marmalade, all were beloved companions of the Victorian table. Porridge, too, held its place. Oatmeal, simmered until thick, was ladled into bowls and topped with milk, cream, or treacle. It was the humbler dish of the table, associated with Scottish frugality and plain living. Yet it lingered even in grander homes, for it spoke of health. Doctors praised its nourishing qualities, and mothers urged it upon children reluctant to face the day. to drink tea was supreme. The morning teapot, filled with a robust black blend, was carried in by the parlour-maid or set upon the sideboard. Cups were poured with care. Some families also took coffee, though its presence was more cosmopolitan, a mark of travel or continental taste. Cocoa appeared in certain households, particularly for children or those who found coffee too strong. Milk, in its jug, stood ready, and sugar was placed in silver bowls. Dispensed with tiny tongs. Fruit added freshness to this spread. In season, there might be apples, pears, or plums. In wealthier homes, oranges and bananas, imported through growing global trade, appeared. Grapes were displayed in cut-glass dishes, a luxury that spoke of prosperity. For those in the countryside, the fruit was often fresh from the garden, a reminder of the estate's abundance. Presiding over all this variety was the rhythm of the household. Breakfast was not served at once, but in stages, as family members descended the stairs. The table was laid early, and dishes were kept warm under silver covers. Servants passed in and out, bringing fresh toast, replenishing the teapot, refilling the marmalade jar. The meal might last for hours, with some members of the family appearing at 8, others at 9, still others near 10. Unlike dinner, breakfast was elastic, shaped by the flow of domestic life. For the mistress of the house, breakfast was also a test of order. To maintain a well-stocked and orderly breakfast table was proof of her competence. The butter must be fresh, the eggs well cooked, the toast hot, the preserves neatly presented. A sloppy breakfast suggested a sloppy household. Thus, even as family members conversed or read the morning paper in ease, the unseen labour of servants and mistress alike hummed beneath the surface, ensuring smoothness to the Victorian sensibility. Breakfast was therefore more than food. It was a statement of civility, of respectability, of readiness to face the day. A man who left the house well-fed was a man fortified for his office or factory. A woman who presided over a polished breakfast table was a woman who showed mastery of her domestic sphere. Even children, spooning porridge or nibbling toast, were trained in the rituals of orderliness, patience, and gratitude. The memory of such breakfasts lingers in countless Victorian diaries and novels. Gentlemen remark upon the satisfaction of kippers, ladies write of toast racks and steaming teapots. Travellers recall the comfort of porridge in distant inns. To read these accounts is to realize that breakfast was not a side note in the Victorian day. It was its quiet cornerstone, the place where nourishment and social performance met in a cloth-covered harmony. And so, the Victorian breakfast table gleamed each morning. The silver shone, the tea steamed, the dishes of fish and eggs gave forth their aroma. Outside the window, the world bustled with the smoke and rattle of carriages, the clang of industry, the cries of hawkers. Inside, the family began their day with ritual, with abundance, with order. To sit at that table was to partake, not only of food but of a vision of Victorian life itself, disciplined, prosperous, layered and precise. If the middle-class or upper-class breakfast of Victorian England gleamed with polished silver and variety, the table of the working family told a different story. To pass from the carpeted breakfast room of a merchant or lawyer into the narrow kitchen of a factory worker was to step across a gulf not merely of wealth, but of sustenance itself. And yet both meals whether served upon a damask cloth or a scrubbed wooden board, were called breakfast, for both marked the same essential moment of transition from night to day in the modest cottages of rural labourers or the cramped lodgings of industrial towns. The meal of the morning was bound by necessity. It was rarely leisurely, rarely abundant, and rarely stretched across hours. For those who faced the clang of the mill bell or the long walk to a field at dawn, breakfast was taken swiftly in the shadow of work that waited. The most common fare was bread, not the delicate muffins or crumpets of wealth, but a coarse loaf of brown or white bread, purchased from the baker or baked at home if flour and fire could be spared. A thick slice, cut roughly, was the staple for men, women, and children alike. To soften it, butter was spread when it could be afforded, but often dripping rendered fat saved from previous cooking served in its place. When even this was scarce, the bread was eaten plain, accompanied only by a mug of weak tea. Tea, in fact, had become the near universal companion of the working-class breakfast by the mid-19th century, though imported and once considered a luxury. By the 1860s it had filtered through every layer of society. For the working poor, it was often bought in small quantities, cheap blends stretched thin, used again and again until flavour was nearly gone. A spoonful of sugar brightened it, though this too was measured carefully. For many families, tea provided warmth more than nutrition, a comfort in the chill of early mornings, before a day of hard labour. For those in better stead, porridge appeared. Oatmeal or barley meal, boiled with water or milk, created a filling. If plain, dish. It required time to prepare, and so it was more common in households where a mother, wife, or elder child rose before dawn to tend the pot. Sweetened with treacle or molasses, when such things could be afforded, it was sustaining and heavy, better suited to labour than the thin slices of bread alone. Meat at breakfast was a rarity for the poor. Bacon, that near universal symbol of the Victorian table, appeared only in scraps. A small piece of streaky bacon might be fried on Sundays, its fat then saved in a jar to flavour the weekday bread. Sausages, kidneys, chops, these belonged to the imagination of the wealthy or the pages of novels, not the reality of factory courts and tenement kitchens. A working man might have them only on feast days, or when a butcher's cheaper cuts could be purchased late in the market. Cheese, however, played a modest but important role. A wedge of hard cheese, cut and eaten with bread, was nourishing and filling, particularly in rural households, where dairying was part of daily life. Cheese could be had in small amounts and stood as a reliable partner to bread. Children often ate whatever portion of bread or porridge could be spared for them, sometimes sweetened with a bit of treacle, sometimes soaked in milk if such was available. It was not unusual for working-class children to begin the day with very little in their stomachs, rushing out the door to school or work with little more than tea or a crust. The harshness of hunger was a familiar shadow in many households, softened only by the ingenuity of mothers who stretched each loaf and measure of tea as far as it could go. In contrast to the gleaming breakfast rooms of the middle classes, the setting itself told of difference. The table, if there was one, might be a small wooden board, scrubbed but scarred with years of use. Crockery was mismatched, often chipped. A single teapot served the whole family, cups filled in turn, sometimes shared. There were no silver toast racks, no cut glass, preserved dishes. The butter, if present, sat on a plate without ornament. The jam, if it appeared, was homemade, thick and dark, from fruit gathered or purchased cheaply in season. The ritual of breakfast, too, differed, where wealthier families might drift into the dining room across hours. Working-class families ate quickly and together, often before the first light of dawn. Men rose early, pulled on boots, and ate swiftly before heading to work. Women, if employed themselves in mills or shops, hurried too, balancing their own bites with preparing food for husbands and children. Conversation was limited, overshadowed by the press of time. The luxury of reading the newspaper over toast and tea belonged to another world. Yet despite its plainness, the working-class breakfast was no less vital to the rhythm of life. It was the foundation upon which long hours of labor were born. A slice of bread and dripping, though meager, gave fuel for the loom, the forge, the plough. The strength of men and women alike was carried forward from these simple meals. Even when they fell far short of abundance, it is important to note that within the working classes there were gradations: skilled workers, artisans, and those with steady wages could manage more than the poorest of laborers. Their breakfasts might include bacon more regularly, or eggs purchased from local markets. Some households, particularly in rural areas where chickens were kept, had the advantage of fresh eggs daily. A fried egg on bread was a luxury compared to the crust and tea of the destitute. The world of the Victorian poor was not uniform. It was a spectrum shaped by wages, geography, and circumstance. There was also the distinction between urban and rural breakfasts. In the crowded towns, bread and tea reigned supreme. In the countryside, families might have milk fresh from the cow, oatmeal grown nearby, or occasional access to eggs, cheese, and garden produce. Though still modest, the rural table sometimes offered a freshness the urban poor lacked. A cottage breakfast of porridge, fresh milk, and apples was humble, yet it carried a nourishment unavailable in a soot-choked industrial court. Despite the harshness, there was dignity in these meals. Diaries and oral histories from the time show not only hunger, but also care. Mothers rose early to brew tea, to slice bread, to warm porridge for children. Husbands carried with them the memory of a wife's effort in preparing what little there was. Even when plain and meager, breakfast was bound up in love, in family, in the stubborn persistence of ordinary life. When reformers and philanthropists of the Victorian age spoke of hunger and poverty, they often returned to the image of the poor. Breakfast, a weak cup of tea and a dry crust of bread, became a symbol of deprivation, contrasted sharply with the rich abundance of the upper classes. And yet for millions, this was reality, lived without complaint, for there was no comparison. Within their own circles, breakfast was what it had always been: bread, tea, perhaps porridge, rarely more. Thus the Victorian morning revealed its contrasts most clearly at the table. In one household, a man unfolded his newspaper beside kippers, eggs, toast, and jam, sipping coffee from a delicate porcelain cup. In another, a man tied his boots with rough hands, swallowed a slice of bread dipped in dripping, and drank tea from a chipped mug before stepping out into the cold. Both called it breakfast, both began their day, yet the gulf between them stretched wide. This gulf, etched in food as in so many things, was the mirror of Victorian society itself. Abundance and scarcity, comfort and hardship, refinement and roughness all coexisted, side by side, in the same cities, even in the same streets. And each morning, as families sat at their tables, whether polished or plain, the shape of their lives was revealed in the first meal of the day. When we examine the Victorian breakfast, beyond the slices of bread, the rashers of bacon, or the endless cups of tea, what emerges is not merely a meal, but a language of culture. It was a daily ritual that signified status, marked respectability, and reflected the moral ideals of the 19th century. Breakfast was sustenance, certainly, but it was also a performance. To sit at the breakfast table was to announce who you were, who you wished to appear to be within the tightly structured hierarchy of Victorian society. To understand this, we must recall how deeply Victorians linked food with morality. The very notion of respectability, that prized quality that separated the solid middle class from the vulgar poor or the decadent rich, was bound up in the discipline of meals. Breakfast was expected to be hearty but not excessive, ordered but not hurried, nourishing yet proper. To eat a well-set breakfast suggested diligence, prosperity, and stability. To neglect it, or to eat poorly, hinted at disorder, poverty, or moral laxity. For the middle and upper classes, breakfast became almost an emblem of domestic virtue. The table was laid each morning with precision, cloth smooth, silver polished, crockery clean, food arranged with care. The presence of bacon, eggs, toast, and preserves signaled not merely wealth, but also steadiness. A family that could afford a substantial breakfast every morning was a family that had achieved the Victorian ideal of security. Guests or visitors who glimpsed such a table would instantly recognize the household's respectability. The newspapers and etiquette manuals of the era made much of this. They offered advice not only on what to serve, but on how it should be presented. Breakfast, like tea in the afternoon, was one of those moments when hospitality and refinement were judged. The table should not appear ostentatious, no one wished to look showy before noon, but it ought to display abundance and order. To have the toast piping hot, the eggs fresh, the tea strong but clear, was to demonstrate competence and care. In this way, breakfast became a test of the mistress of the house, her skill in managing servants, her attention to detail, and her success in upholding family honor through daily routine. For men, breakfast carried different symbolic weight. The act of sitting down to a substantial meal before work suggested vigor, industriousness, and readiness for the day. The Victorian man was expected to face his labors fortified by a proper breakfast. Indeed, advice literature often warned against setting off without one. To skip breakfast was not merely unhealthy, it was a sign of disorder, of neglect of one's body and duties. A man who did not eat breakfast risked appearing careless or weak, and thus unfit for the serious tasks of commerce, politics, or profession. Within the working classes, too, breakfast bore meaning. Although their fare was simpler bread, porridge, weak teeth still represented a critical moment of family life. To have a meal at all before a day of toil was to cling to dignity in the face of hardship. Reformers who visited poor households often remarked on the sight of a family gathered around their modest table in the early morning. However meager the food, the very act of sitting down together was evidence of resilience and it proved that these families, though pressed by poverty, upheld the moral structure of domestic life that Victorians valued so highly. Breakfast also carried symbolic importance in the public imagination of Victorian society. Writers, journalists, and novelists often used it to reveal character. A hero might be described as eating a simple but hearty breakfast, suggesting soundness and strength. A villain might be hinted at through his indulgence in luxury, beginning his day with champagne and game pies instead of wholesome bread and eggs. Even comic portrayals, such as satirical sketches of greedy aldermen at breakfast tables, groaning under platters of food, conveyed cultural anxieties about gluttony, morality, and the appearance of respectability. The symbolism extended into the very foods themselves. Bread, for example, was more than a staple. It was a moral food. Fresh, wholesome bread signified honesty and health, while adulterated bread cheapened with alum or chalk. As often happened in poorer districts, stood as a symbol of corruption and social neglect. Tea, so universal, symbolized comfort and civility, yet also empire, for it carried within its leaves the story of Britain's global reach. To drink tea at breakfast was to participate, unconsciously, in the rhythms of imperial commerce. Bacon and eggs, meanwhile, became almost emblematic of Englishness itself, anchoring the idea of national identity in a plate of food. Breakfast was also deeply tied to the Victorian sense of time. To eat breakfast punctually was to align oneself with the order and discipline of the age. The morning meal was meant to set the rhythm of the day. It marked the transition from private rest to public duty. Employers and reformers alike emphasized its role in maintaining productivity. The worker, fortified by porridge and tea, was expected to perform better, to endure the long hours of labor. The clerk or lawyer, beginning his day with toast and coffee, was presumed more efficient, more reliable, because his morning had followed the proper pattern. This attachment to order gave breakfast a quasi-moral dimension. To rush it, to eat irregularly, or to indulge excessively was to deviate from the ideal. Temperance advocates, for instance, promoted breakfast as a safeguard against drink. A man who began his day with wholesome food was less likely, they argued, to seek spirits later in the morning. Thus breakfast became part of the wider moral campaigns of the 19th century, bound up in debates about sobriety, health, and social reform. Nor can we ignore the gendered symbolism of the meal. For women, breakfast was often the stage upon which their competence as wives, mothers, or mistresses of households was judged. The ability to manage a kitchen so that breakfast appeared regularly, properly, and pleasantly was a mark of feminine virtue. A poorly managed breakfast could draw censure, not merely as a failure of cookery, but as a failure of womanly duty. In contrast, a well-served meal affirmed a woman's role as the heart of domestic life, the guardian of order and comfort. In countless ways, breakfast upheld and reinforced the Victorian ideal of separate spheres. Men fortified for public work, women proving their domestic mastery through food and hospitality. Even the act of reading the newspaper at breakfast carried symbolic weight. It suggested the merging of the private and public spheres, the household and the nation. The family table became a miniature forum where news of the empire, politics, and commerce filtered into domestic life. The man reading aloud from the paper while buttering his toast became an emblem of the informed citizen. Linking domestic calm with civic awareness, it is telling that many Victorian novels and memoirs pause to describe breakfasts in detail. These passages are not incidental. They tell us who the characters are, what their households are like, what values they embody. A sparse breakfast signals want or mismanagement. A bountiful one signals comfort and order. Breakfast scenes, thus, worked as a shorthand for identity, a domestic snapshot that readers instantly understood. Ultimately, breakfast in Victorian England was never only about hunger. It was about appearance, morality, class, gender, and national pride. It shaped how people saw themselves and how they were seen by others. It marked the difference between the prosperous and the poor, between the disciplined and the disorderly, between the respectable and the disreputable. In the quiet moments of morning, around tables humble or grand, the values of an age were rehearsed daily in bread and tea, bacon and eggs, porridge and dripping dot. So when we ask, what did a Victorian breakfast actually look like, we find two answers. One is literal, the food itself, plain or plentiful. The other is symbolic, the meanings layered upon those foods, the cultural weight they carried. Together, they reveal breakfast as not merely the first meal of the day, but a mirror of Victorian society itself, where identity was formed and performed each morning before the world began its work.